You're listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plimer.
For someone to explain,
bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
All right, welcome to episode number 13 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plimer, and joining me today is David Butcher. David was a professional and semi-professional player for just under 10 years. He played in England, France, Ireland and Scotland, and then retired in 2006 due to injury. He then went on to work for the Scottish Rugby Union for 8 years as their performance coach, where he focused on talent acquisition and performance development, as well as working as a specialist skills coach specialising in the scrum. He's the current Rugby Ontario High Performance Manager, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show. So welcome, Butch.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, cheers. How are you settling in now to Canada? It's been just a little over, or close to a year.
Yeah, it's great. I obviously didn't experience the winter until recently, but the summer was very good to us. First, obviously being in Scotland a lot, don't get to see the sun very much, but so it was. It's been very enjoyable so far.
Yeah, well, you're still posting like weather screenshots and stuff like that on Facebook, so you're still a bit green.
Exactly, mate. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. So, what's your? I touched on it a bit in the intro. What's your backstory? Bit of rugby, professionally, semi-pro, and then you work with the Scottish Union. What's the kind of last 10, 15 years been?
Yeah, the last 10, 15 years have been really, rugby's been very good to me. I came to the sport quite late. My original sport was boxing, but I've got to be honest, I wasn't the greatest at it, and went and played rugby just to keep fit, really, and fell in love with the game, and then focused all my time on that. And I was lucky enough, probably just as I turned 20, to get a pro contract just when rugby was turning professional, when it was all starting to change. And ever since then, a bit of a rugby gypsy, kind of used rugby to see a bit of the world, as well as experience different rugby environments, different coaches, work with different players. So as you alluded to, being all around Europe playing rugby, and then was lucky enough after I got injured to be asked to apply for the job with SRU, and I was lucky enough to get it and worked there for 8 years. And the main job I had was finding players, acquiring the players, and then developing them. Yeah. And there was a big push in Scotland to find players outside of the geographical boundaries of Scotland, and I was one of the people tasked with that. So I worked a lot with the Premiership academies, the Premiership teams, Championship teams, as well as teams in France to find these players that were Scottish qualified.
Okay.
Because as you know, the player pool in Scotland is extremely small. So whether people like it or not, we have to be creative how we find Scottish players.
Yeah. So you weren't getting guys with the 3-year rule. You were getting guys that were qualified and ready to go straight away.
Yeah, people that were either born in Scotland, parents of Scotland, grandparents. We were looking for all them, and what we sold it as was a legitimate route into international rugby. So sometimes they picked it as of right. And myself, when I went through the representative system in Scotland, then I picked it as of right. Born in Scotland, parents are Scottish. Some of them, it was because it was a route into international rugby and professionalism. They fell out of one program and came into our program. So there was a variety of different ways of picking these players up.
Yeah, great. Okay, so for those not aware of the Rugby Ontario landscape, other than being a gigantic province geographically, what's a bit of a general description on the rugby landscape there?
The rugby landscape there is, as you alluded to, it's an enormous province. Having been here for only about 10, 11 months, getting my head around the logistics has been a big thing for me. It's broken up into 4 branches, and those branches service themselves to a degree, and then Rugby Ontario sits over the top of that. Mm-hmm. We've got a massive amount of players here. We've got something around the 42-43% of all players playing in Canada, so we have a massive amount of rugby in Ontario. Yeah. But it's all basically club and provincial representative teams. And we're really trying to drive at the minute to increase the level of performance development and high performance development within the province.
Yeah. So when you arrived, what what was the high performance kind of setup like when you came in?
So what's happened, before I got here is it's all been good. They've been very successful in what they've done, but it's basically been representative teams, and from those teams, players have been picked for Canada. So it was all team based. It was all select. Everything was geared around selecting a team. And what we haven't done, what probably hasn't happened a lot in Canada, and it is starting to happen in different regions now, is there was no individual performance development stream to sit alongside the representative teams. Yeah. So if you had a little gem of a player, there was no system that you had to say, he's fantastic, how do we accelerate his or her development? So it was basically, find the kids, put them in some training, put them in a team, play, select them for Canada. Yeah. There was no actual any sort of development alongside it. So that's the biggest thing that I've been brought in to do, to really look at how we develop our players, and as a knock-on effect of that, develop the performance of the teams. Yeah, right. So in the past, it was more just pick the good guys out of clubs and go from there. Whereas you're now putting in systems where it's, okay, let's identify the guys who have long-term potential and work with them individually and in small groups like academy setups, and then they stay with their clubs and then get funneled into the rep teams. I think that the thing you said there is really relevant about the difference between selection and talent identification. That before, and it was no fault of anyone's, we were selecting and we were very successful in what we did, and the teams were successful. But there's a massive difference between selection and talent identification, and being able to see a player at 16 and see his potential to move through to 20 and then beyond that. Yeah. So how are we identifying talent? Because it comes in a variety of different guises. Yeah. It's not always skill based. It might be physically based. It might be mentally based. Absolutely. It might be, there's all different things, and that ability to see past the initial perception of a player and actually identify the talent within the player, that's a big thing, and that takes a cultural change as well. Yeah, and you got to have like that initial development. Like if we look at it as a pyramid, that base has got to be really big, because you're going to have some retention issues there, some drop off, and then exactly. Yeah. And so what, and that's exactly right, Andy. I mean, what we've done is we've decentralised everything, as you spoke about at the beginning. The logistics of Ontario are huge. So what we've done is taken the logistics out of it to a degree and decentralised all the training right up until we pick the provincial team, and then we centralise it. And it's exactly like you said, it's building that really big base at the bottom to cast the net as wide as we can, to sweep in as much talent, and then identify basically the cream off the top, and then put them into the provincial team, and then scrape the cream off the top of that, and then put them in performance development programs. Yeah, I was going to ask about that, the decentralised model that you guys run. What's a basic rundown of that? That you rolled that out the first year in the summer? Yeah, we rolled that out last year, and the basic premise was, we weren't capturing enough of the players within the province. So what we did is we decentralised it to 3 hubs at all the junior age groups from 15 through to 18. Yep. That'll run again this year with a few tweaks in terms of the content. Yep. So there'll be training, and then there'll be games against all the other hubs. Yeah. That'll happen twice. In year 4, we're then looking to increase that to 4 hubs. Okay. And we'll keep it then at 4 hubs, and then we'll just change the content of the program to make the talent identification within the program more and more robust. That's great. And what's the kind of time frame? What's the contact time with those athletes, and when's it run from and end? We're a bit limited between the school officer championships finishing and the Rugby Canada. That's like in June, right? Yeah, so we start the first week of June, and then we go through to August. So it's quite a short window, so we have a lot of intense activity. Out the top of that, however, that's when we start picking the individuals. So one thing that I'm looking to run, if not next season, but the season after, is once we've picked them at the top of the season, to look at, right, that's when we start our next round of development for the next season, or the next 2 seasons with the players. So we basically use the provincial teams and programs to identify the talent. Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. And just in your time here, what have been some of the challenges for providing building a high performance environment in what essentially is a tier 2 rugby country? I think the understanding of what high performance is, and understanding that it's not just representative rugby. It is about individual talent development. Mm-hmm. Also, we spoke about logistics, just trying to get the best players engaged with the best coaches. You could have a coach in one side of Ontario and the best player that he could be working with the other side of Ontario, and they're, legitimately, 10 hours apart driving. So trying to get those people engaged. And just the culture. There is a very, very strong, very good rugby culture in Ontario, but we need to change that culture of, performance. It's not necessarily about winning. It's about how do we perform and how do we make the kids perform. We've got to almost take that win mentality out of it. Because if we're in a game and we win 6-3, it's been a terrible game. Then what? Realistically, between 15 and 18, what's been the point of that game? Yeah. Whereas if we win by 2 points and it's like a 30-point to 28 game, it's been the best run in rugby, and the kids have really understood how to execute their game plan. Then for me, that's been a result. Yeah. So trying to change that culture somewhat to really be process driven rather than outcome driven.
Yeah, I can see the challenges of that, because I've been to a number of national festivals now, age grade national festivals, and it's BC versus Ontario, and then the rest kind of traditionally have battled out for third spot, and it tends to be a lot of focus on that matchup with BC and Ontario, and I agree. It's at that age group, it's a development window, and you want your top team to be winning, i.e. like the seniors, the senior men, and from there we've got to be developing athletes, not winning should come as a result of doing the good development work.
100%. And that's what a lot of people, I think, when I make that statement, don't understand that. I'm not saying I don't want to win. Every rugby player wants to win. That goes without saying. But it's the process into that win. And you're absolutely right. If your process is right and you're focused on individual, small group and collective performance and how they perform and how they execute what you're asking them to do, how they grow through the game, then naturally they'll get the win. And just what are our outcomes? Where our outcomes are that performance development. Our outcomes aren't to win a CRC necessarily. It's about how do we develop that player, and then how do we put him in a red shirt to represent his country. That's what we really have to push for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so there's been some challenges, but there's got to be some advantages of working in a tier 2 country, especially in a very strong rugby province like Ontario. What's been some of the advantages?
The advantages are that the athletes themselves, it was the first thing that struck me in my first few months here, just walking around and watching the rugby, especially at the provincial level. I came in just as the provincial season was starting, and watching some of the athletes, they're incredible athletes. Yeah. In the women's game, it struck me more than the men's game, I'll be honest, because I think we get a lot of the tier 1 athletes coming into the women's game at the minute. But still, in the male side, a 16-year-old in Canada is a much more rounded athlete than a 16-year-old in a lot of the European countries. Oh, that's good to hear. And that's evidence of the education system, how much sport is played. It's a very much outdoor-driven culture here. In the summer, everyone's out doing things, and it does show in the sport. And I think for me, that is the biggest bonus, because we've got the raw material there. We've got the athletes. It's just how we then accelerate their development as soon as we get them.
Yeah, I agree. And then you've got the athletes that don't know they're rugby players yet, and making rugby an option for them.
100%.
Yeah. All right. So you work with the Scottish Rugby Union. What's some of the key things that you learnt in your 8 years with the SRU that you're applying to your high performance role with Ontario?
I think the biggest thing I first learned when I came into the SRU was how to coach. Yeah, I had all this knowledge in my head, and
definitely helps.
Yeah, and I came in and I thought I knew how to coach, and I thought I knew how to put my information in my head out to the players, and very quickly realised there was a lot more to coaching than just regurgitating the information that you'd accrued over a period of time. Yeah. So, and I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with a lot of very, very good coaches and have some mentors in my, my actual coaching itself and the structure of coaching. The next thing I learned there is how do we ID talent? That was the biggest thing for me. Looking past the rugby player, looking past what you actually see, and right, what can I take in that player? Looking at the positives in the player. Right, let's look at what that player's got. can I then influence it, and then can I make him into an international professional player? So that was the biggest thing, and actually learning about that over a period of time. And then understanding how a very well-structured daily training environment can influence and accelerate, and how much it can accelerate a player's development. It was amazing to see some of the players that you got from a school level and identify them with real talent, put them in a daily training environment, and then you see them like almost week on week just developing at such a rate of knots. I think that's where in Canada we struggle, because we can identify, and as I said, we've definitely got the raw talent, but then you pick up a player at 16 in one of the European nations and you can basically put him in full-time rugby. It's not a contracted position, but he's basically in full-time rugby. And that player's talent acceleration is just through the roof.
Yeah.
And there's no other way of really replicating that apart from being in a daily training environment.
Absolutely. Like it's a human body. You at that age, like you don't need much of a stimulus to adapt, whether it be strength and conditioning or skill-wise. And if you get that stimulus every day, you're going to adapt it at a rapid rate. But if you're getting it once a week or once a fortnight, you're not going to develop as fast as that. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. The other thing that's really evident is that the specialist skills aspect to it. When you found a player, and even if he's not, he or she's not in that position at that time, if you're switching them positions and you have a specialist skills division within your union, you can attach them to a scrum coach, kicking coach, scrum half coach, and that's part of their accelerated development as well. That kid's then getting the tactical, physical, mental. He's getting bombarded with everything, and then as long as he's managed correctly, and that's another thing that a lot of the programs do really well. They sit a manager over the top of them to make sure the kid isn't overloaded. Their development is massive, absolutely enormous.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And we're just going back a bit there on the talent ID piece. I think that's I'm fascinated by that, because it's there's not a lot of science to it. There's no it's not paint by numbers. Kind of pick the kid who's going to be a great rugby player in 5 years' time. What are some of the key things, like when you're watching a team or you're around a team? You're obviously looking at potential physical development, but also some attitude and some mindset stuff as well. I
think you've got to have a profile first of what you're actually looking for, and it changes from union to union somewhat. But the physical metrics you spoke about are probably the biggest. As an example of that, you're sent out to identify players that can play tight head prop. Well, most of them at school, because they're usually the early maturers, the biggest, most powerful individuals, they're playing in the back row. Yeah. Because that coach wants them to get on the ball more, because he wants the big kid to be rumbling up the pitch. Yeah. Whereas realistically, you try and think, where would that kid be in 3 or 4 years? Well, he's probably going to be at a low level, because he's only 6'1" and he's probably a bit slower and everyone's caught up to him. But as a prop, if you identify those physical metrics really early, and then you think, well, where would he best fit in terms of a profile? It's probably a tight head prop. Yeah. And then you put him in there. So having the ability to, like I said, to look past where the player's playing, and look past the actual player, and look at the physical metrics and look at the physical capabilities of that player, that gives you a really good idea of where they would fit as a player moving through into maybe a high performance level. But for me, you've got to have that profile. You've got to have a profile of each player, what you're looking for at the end product. So then you can work backwards and say, well, he ticks that box, he ticks that box, he ticks that box. Then it's up to me as a sports developer to say, well, can I influence the rest of the stuff he hasn't got? If I can, then we're saying, well, I've identified that talent. Now it's up to me to develop as a coach.
Yeah, that's great. There's some good stuff there, like on just different theories and different methods that people use for talent ID, or some even don't call it talent ID; they call it more talent development. And I think just going back to your prop there, a slow back rower can be a pretty fast prop. And
exactly.
Okay, so what's your work week look like when you're in your current role? So like whether I suppose it's going to differ in off season like we're in now compared to in season. What's some of the things you're doing day by day, week by week?
So off season, it's very, very administratively heavy. There's a lot of emails, a lot of planning to be going on, a lot of working with a lot of the partners that you have within the province and working with Rugby Canada to make sure that we have an understanding of what their programs look like through the season, so that we can sort of re-engineer what our season looks like from start to finish.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that going on, a lot of working with the ministry in terms of funding and things like that, so making sure that our programs align with that.
Yeah.
At the minute for me, the big push is trying to get my high performance plan written.
Yeah.
So I have a 3-year high performance plan that guides us through everything we want to do into an outcome in 3 years' time. So working with the Canadian Institute of Sport to get that, and then moving into the season, the administration would still be there. It'd still be, probably 60% of the workload, but then it would be more starting to work with the coaches, starting to help them on the ground, mentor them, make sure they've, are trying to work on their technical knowledge, their planning, how they're working through the programs, how they're executing their programs, etc., etc. And then aiding the talent identification process as well.
Yeah, and so a lot of that's coach development. How much actual hands-on coaching do you get to do?
Not as much as I want, I'll be honest. Coming the role I had with the SIU, it was about 20%, 25% of my time was all hands-on coaching. But in any role, even the top coaches, you would only get about a 20-25% of your time actually physically coaching.
Yeah.
Here, I'd say at the moment, and it's just the way it has to be at the minute, it's about 5% of my job.
Yeah.
As the programs start to solidify, and once we've really driven them hard to get where they want to be, then maybe it can open up. But at this moment in time, I'm feeling more of a skills coach role. So, example, the Blues this year, I'm going to come in as a defence coach. So, do every other session. Same with the Senior Storm, which is our women's program, doing some scrum work. So it still fulfills that coach in me, because I'm always going to be a coach. That's always going to be my first love.
For sure.
But at the moment, and rightly so, it has to just take a back step to all the program development.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And you're also just on the scrum work there. You've also mentioned that you're doing or you're starting up like a front row talent ID program. What's the deal with that?
Looking at the props we've got in Canada and Ontario, we've got some really good props at the minute, Dougie Wooldridge, DJ Sears, etc., etc. But a lot of them are starting to come to the ends of their career, so it's looking, if we took all the older guard away, we'd be left with not a lot. And I think because we are the biggest province, there must be more props out there, or as we spoke about, players that aren't props, that should be props, that we can identify and then develop. And I think we've got the ability to do it. So and I know just looking at it insular, for us as a province, if some of those props did retire tomorrow, we'd be struggling a little bit in the front row.
Yeah.
Just in props in particular. So trying to identify them and then try to put them through some sessions and then try to get them involved in the provincial program, even if they're not ready this year. Looking forward to next year or the year after. We're really trying to look at how we can get that succession planning going in the front row.
So are you using the hub system for that, or you're using clubs for that? Or
yeah, we're going to run some identification sessions, so some open sessions, and just making it open to the props. And maybe trying to run that at 2 or 3 sites. Trying to just get as many of them in, use the clubs, trying to get the club coaches involved. The other thing is trying to get the coaches involved in how they can develop scrummaging and how they can develop props. Because all of a sudden, you get a coach working with a guy every week and he starts to flourish, and you think, well, he's shown some potential. Now let's get him and see what we can do with him.
Yeah, that's great. So that my next question is probably answered. Your favourite area of rugby to coach is probably the scrum, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I always played prop. As soon as I started playing, it's just the combative nature of it just really appealed to me.
Yeah.
I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, and I know everyone doesn't can't understand why you play it, but yeah, I love the technical nature of it as well, and how much coaching you can do with it. Also, like I said, I like the mental aspect of it. Top props at the top level really have to go through mentally. Every single time the scrummaging playing, it really appeals to me. So yeah, I love scrummaging.
Yeah, well, I played hooker in under 14s rugby league, so I completely understand what you're talking about.
Just put your head in and don't push.
Yeah, exactly. No, I even though I'm a back, I do enjoy the scrum battle. I don't understand a lot of what's going on, but I try to understand what's going on, and often I get it wrong, but that's okay. Yeah, I think I just think it's such a crucial part of the game, and we can't lose that scrum, because then it does become just a version of rugby league.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the way the scrimmaging is going at the minute, I think it's taking the right route. It's taken a route of safety, which we have to have.
Yeah.
But I'm just, I'm wary that it doesn't go too far. I'm glad they've got a lot of people such as Mike Cron, who's obviously a legend in the scrimmaging world, who's working with guys, and you see how important it is even at international level. I mean, yourself being in Australia, you saw what leaps and bounds Australia scrum, and it made a massive difference to their game.
Yeah.
They've got some of the best backs in the world, but sometimes they were played out of the game because a scrum or a pack would strangle them. Yeah. But now you've got a really good pack. You've got big guys scrummaging well who can also carry. The game's starting to become really rounded, and it's not. If one of their players knocks on, it's not everyone thinking, geez, I'm against this pack, I'm going to put the ball in here and I'm going to go backwards at 100 miles an hour. They're starting to be really competitive. So, and it's like you said, it's a crucial part of the game.
Yeah. No, I do enjoy it, and I like the proposed rule changes that they've put in place. So why don't we talk about that a bit? What do you the proposed, I suppose they're ELVs that they're playing over in the ITM Cup there. I think they've taken the hit completely out of the scrum. Is that right?
They have, yeah. I haven't seen much of it at the minute. It's basically they're all the pre-engaged. I'm not decided whether I like it or dislike it at the minute yet. I'd like to see more of it before I make my decision. And it's not, if it's the outcome is we're still scrummaging, we're still technically based. It's still a challenge for each
contest for the ball,
contest for the ball, and that's the main thing. And I think it still will be. I'm not sure whether it will increase or decrease the amount of collapsed scrums or messing about with scrums. I really don't know. I'd have to see a lot more of it actually in action before I could make that call.
Yeah, so just how would that affect your way if you were subject to those rules as a scrum coach? How would that influence your sessions?
I don't think it would. The way I work anyway, there's a lot of work done to manipulate people before and after the ball. Mm-hmm. So you would looking at how can I achieve the height I want to scrimmage at, and how would I dictate the angles that I scrimmage at. So we'd have to look more of. It's more it used to be all sort of hit-based scrummaging where you can just keep and just rumble over them. Now it's much more of a wrestling sort of chess match, and when you get in there, right, how am I going to hold the player where I need to hold them, and then how am I going to exert force onto them and move them? So you're basically starting from trying to produce force from a standing start.
Yeah.
And how would you do it? It will influence the players physically more than anything. They'll have to become more endurance-based athletes because they'll have to be pushing for longer at lower heights. Mm. So it may produce slightly smaller props, but much more powerful and dynamic. And I think you're starting to see that already. Like people like Marcus Iertza, who's for me probably the best scrummaging prop in the world at the minute.
Yeah.
He's a big guy, but he's not a huge guy. But the new scrum laws really suit him.
Yeah.
He's dominating people all over the place.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I suppose it would have a knock-on effect in the strength and conditioning realm, the need for probably a higher isometric strength and, like you say, some muscular endurance there as well. All right, sweet. So, if someone was watching you coach a scrummaging session, what's some of the things they'd see and hear from you over say a 20, 30-minute scrummaging session?
I think the biggest thing would be from me, and I'm really happy that people see this. I was out in Alberta this weekend running the scrum session, is how much I involved the players.
Yeah.
As I said, when I first started, it was all tell.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you how to scrummage. This is how you scrummage because I know how to scrummage. And I very, very quickly got away from that. There's a lot of question and answering. There's a lot of me getting the players to understand what they're doing, because they're only with me a very short amount of time. They've got to understand what they're doing. They've got to be able to replicate it so then they can go away and practice it and come back better players. There's no point in me just telling them all the time. I've got to ensure that they have an understanding of it, and I've got to use question and answering to get that. So they would see a lot of that sort of coaching process. I think the other side of it is, and it's the bit I enjoy the most, is the small details and the technical side of scrummaging. I'm a big fan of. I'm a very detailed orientated person, and that's why I love scrummaging, because it's the small details that make a massive difference. So there would be a lot of detail in it from the players.
Yeah,
and then a lot of involvement from the players and a lot of peer coaching. You know, the players are the guys on the pitch. You know, I'm there just to point them all in the right direction. You know, I've got to empower the players to coach when they're on the pitch. They are the coaches on the pitch. So getting them to feed back to each other, a lot of peer coaching, and trying to encourage that as much as I possibly can in the sessions. And, you know, if it gets to the point where the players can run little bits of the session for me, then, you know, I see that as my job. If I can take a step back, I'm not needed, and the players are doing the right things, that's huge to me, if I can do that.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're gonna problem solve on the field. So yeah, and what do you think it's important that a scrum coach can actually demonstrate, certain aspects themselves, or do you?
It is to a certain degree. I've got to admit, I'm struggling more and more with it as the years go on.
Yeah.
I think it's important for them to be able to demonstrate to a certain degree some positions. I can still just about get in a scrum as long as they're not too rough on me and show them different angles and positions. But I think it's more of getting the player in that position, and the player not only getting him in that position, but asking him how he feels, then standing him up and saying, right, can you replicate that again? And getting them back down again, and actually drawing out of them, how does it feel? Where do you feel the pressure coming on there? You know, where can you feel yourself exerting pressure? Why is that? And getting them to feel it, understand it, be able to replicate it. That's the biggest thing for me. Yeah. And you can identify very early on, you know, the guys in your group that can do what you're asking, and then you can use them to demonstrate. I find that's the best. I do sometimes demonstrate myself, but it'll only be 5 or 6 more years before I have to stop doing that completely.
Just bring in some videos of 10 years ago or something.
Exactly.
What you used to do. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. I might just backtrack a little bit to one of the things you were talking about with player development, and it's developing performance programs for individuals. You've got a bit of experience doing that. What's the process you take doing that?
I think it's profiling the player, and it's a simple gap analysis on the player.
Yeah.
You know, what are you know, going back to the positional profiles and the player profiles. You know, where do I want to see this player at the end of this program? So having that final destination, and then mapping out how you're going to get that player there. So every single player needs different things, and looking to wrap the player in a development program. So it may be that the player needs S&C, it may be the player needs putting in an environment, it may be the player needs specialist skills work, it may be a combination of all of them, it may be. So really looking at the player, doing the gap analysis, and then having the ability to put that program together that fits that individual player. Yeah,
and have the necessary resources there as well.
That's the big. If you don't have the resources, you could have all the will in the world, but unfortunately, you'll hit a glass ceiling relatively quickly. Yeah. I think, as we spoke about earlier, you know, in a professional environment, you know, you have so many resources at your fingertips. It's just about understanding what to do with those resources, and getting the player engaged with those resources. And then managing it appropriatare that's the biggest thing when you can get them there.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, so just before we sign off, what are your hopes then for Rugby Ontario this upcoming rugby season? What would be, you know, if someone told you this and this would be achieved, you'd take it. What are some of those things?
In a nutshell, more players in red shirts than last season.
Yeah.
I think we hit about the 45% out of all teams were Ontarians. You know, if I could get that, one of my big KPIs is to get it to 50-55% on a consistent basis. So, you know, more of the players being recognised playing in the red shirt than they did last season. That to me would be a big tick in the box.
Yeah.
And that'd be my, you know, everything would be steered around that end goal.
Yeah, no, it's a good goal to have, absolutely, because that's what it's all about, really, getting that lucky and select few playing for their country.
Definitely.
All right, beauty. So we always end the show with 4 standard questions.
Yeah.
When you were a kid growing up, who was your favourite rugby player that got you really pumped about the game?
It was Jason Leonard, so the English legend that played prop, played the same position as me, kind of the same shape as me when I was playing. Even though I've lost more weight than he has, actually seen him not long ago, he's a big old unit still.
He doesn't have Tim Hortons right next door to him.
No, exactly, mate. So just loved what he embodied as a player. You know, he had that amateur ethos of loving the game and actually loving the social part of the game. But it was an absolute workhorse, just an absolute workhorse for England, and I loved watching him play.
Yeah, he gave Australia a hard time a lot too.
Yeah, he did, mate.
Yeah. What about now? Who's a player or some players running around in the?
Yeah, the biggest one for me, I've really liked watching him just over the past sort of in the World Cup. I really started liking watching was Dane Coles, the New Zealand hooker.
Yeah,
he just embodies for me what the current crop of international players is all about. You know, he's not a huge guy; he's a big guy, but he's just so dynamic. His ball skills are incredible. He takes care of his set piece work. He is quite a destructive scrummager when he needs to be. Mm-hmm. You know, but the speed he shows as a front row forward when he's carrying the ball is incredible. And I think that's the sort of the archetype of what front rows should be now. You know, if you look at what front rows are, they're pretty big, very powerful individuals. You know, and that shows in the power he's got. He's a fantastic ball carrier.
Yeah, there was one try, I can't remember if it was in the Rugby Championship or early on in the Rugby World Cup, where he got a half gap and put the foot down, and it was
just went.
Yeah, it was like a 7 scoring a try, and you know, it's kind of like I suppose he's like a Keith Wood with hair. Like he's very mobile, and
and I mean that's he can do that after he's been scrummaging, getting knocked about, tackling people all game, and then in the 60th minute, you know, this guy spends a lot of time out on the wing, and rightly so, because he could be devastating out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, so on to coaches then. Who's a high profile coach that you like what they're doing with their teams and their kind of philosophies and ideas?
The guy I really like is Eddie Jones.
Yeah,
I've liked him for a while. I used to think he was quite abrupt when I first heard him speak, but then when you actually sit down, you listen to everything he says. There's so much intelligence in what he says. The big thing for me why I love Eddie Jones is every team he coaches, he profiles the team and then fits a game plan around it. He comes in with no sort of preconceived game plan, and he's able to get the most out of every single team he has contact with. I'd love to spend some time with him and see how he does it. I'm sure he's a very hard taskmaster. But what he did with Japan, you know, just epitomises what he can do as a coach. And I think he's going to have a hard time in England. I really do. It's, you know, just how England operates, and he's going to want to change things and make them for the better. It's going to be his way. But I think if England stick with him, he could make England the powerhouse that they should be.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he might get some issues with the clubs there. But no surprises. I'm a massive fan of Eddie Jones. I just think he's fantastic. And I actually, if you look back to the dark days of the Wallabies, which weren't too far away, it came shortly after we got rid of Eddie Jones. And there was a rough patch of Australian rugby under Eddie Jones, no doubt. But I got a mate of mine who did some video work with him, and he just says like the detail that he puts into his coaching and his team is just phenomenal. So I'm a massive fan of him. Yeah. It's just a shame that I have to not like him now because he's the head coach of England.
That's it. Well, you never know. He might come back to Australia. In Australia, you've got a pretty good coach in Michael Checker at the minute, to be fair.
Yeah, absolutely. No, he's a legend too. All right, and what about someone local who's doing the grassroots stuff, grinding away and deserves a bit of recognition?
For me, it's a young coach at the Province called Dan Valley, who's working with the national 18s women's team. The reason I say that is he's really grabbed hold of the programme and he's really driving it as hard as he can. And he's trying to think outside the box, and I always love to see whether you fail or whether you're successful. You know, you should always try and push the envelope as hard as you can. And he's trying to restructure programs, trying to think what is best for the players. And talking to Dan, the one thing that you can see to him is it's always the rationale behind everything has to be it's what's best for the players.
Yeah.
This is what is best for the players. This is how I can have more contact with them. And he's really pushing it. So I think he deserves a lot of credit for what he's trying to do. And I think if he gets more support from RC, then I think he'll have a very, very decent program.
Yeah, no, we're doing our level 3 together, and I really enjoy the chats I've had with him and the time I've spent with him. He's a good man, and yeah, you're definitely right with the women's program. That it's pretty impressive what he's doing so far, and that's gonna help with the overall development of women's rugby in Canada. So yeah, good for him. All right, mate. Well, it's been good chatting about. I didn't think I'd spend my Tuesday night talking about scrummaging for so long and really enjoying it as much, but I have. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been great that you come on the show, and thanks for giving up your time.
Cheers, Andy. Thanks a lot, mate.
Yeah, no worries. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us on Twitter at RugbyCoachSCNR or via the website at therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.